So, emotional journey, BioWare's methods to bringing narrative into levels, which I hope is what you came to see. And I'm going to try and actually turn this. All right, not working. All right, so if someone stopped me in the hall and they asked me, well, what's your talk about? Well, I'd say, well, you know, it's about bringing the story we're telling and telling it in the gameplay sections instead of just in the cutscenes by Dave Feltham. But that's, I think, even more complicated than what I had before, so maybe we'll stick with what I have. This is me. I'm a senior designer on the Mass Effect franchise. That's a fancy title. I'm a level designer, but because I'm old, I get to be senior designer. So, all right. Is it actually going to advance now? No. Excellent. There we go. So this is the only slide you really need to photograph. That's my email address. That's me on Twitter. And this is the website I never update, as you know, all us designers do. I will have this up at the end, and then you can take another photograph if you want. Wait for you to take, there we go. All right. So, give you a little background on me. I went to York University originally for creative writing and decided I would like to get paid, so decided to change to English literature. Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking. With a minor in Renaissance history focusing on women's issues. So yeah, I've really utilized that. I then took a year off and waited tables and went to Seneca College, where I did computer graphics imagery, and for some reason was really happy about it at the time. Right out of college, I started working at a company called Big Studios, Big Animation then, Big Studios now, and got to work with an amazing woman and do broadcast design, animation logos and stuff. And we did stuff for ABC, like Monday Night Football, CBC, the NewsHour with Jim Lair. There's my awesome work right up there. And then I left that company and worked on my own doing freelance stuff, and I redid station up in Canada called The Score. From there, I needed a little bit more of a challenge. I wasn't finding it challenging enough, and I got word from a friend of mine who had heard that a small company was working on an exciting new console. I've just dated myself, and that was the original Xbox, and I worked on Cell Damage, utilizing my English literature degree, and worked as a 3D artist and animator on that, and Cell Damage Cell Damage Overdrive for the PlayStation 2. From there, I became lead artist, really lead level artist, and worked on Full Auto for the Xbox 360 launch, and Full Auto 2 Battle Lines for the PlayStation 3 launch. Again, utilizing my English literature degree. So at this point, the company was starting to fold, and I got an offer to work at BioWare. They were looking to establish their level design department. They had technical designers, but not level designers, people who could actually collaborate with art and stuff like that. And after a bit, I started working on Mass Effect 2, where I worked on Morden's Loyalty, if you've played that, and also the opening of the game in the Cerberus lab, the tutorial. I also worked on Zaid DLC, and Layer of the Shadow Broker. I was actually quite involved with Layer of the Shadow Broker from the beginning, but what you would know of my work specifically was I did the car chase because of my background in English literature. No, in Full Auto and Full Auto 2, we figured that I was probably the best match for that. From there, I went on to Mass Effect 3, where I worked on Cure the Genophage, which we'll be talking about today, Geno N7B the Bomb, which we'll also be talking about today, and helped out on a handful of other levels, and did some initial design on some other levels as well. Went on to Mass Effect 3 Leviathan, specifically the dig site, and was heavily involved in the narrative with Mass Effect 3 Citadel, and the level that I actually worked on, without giving away any spoilers, was the one with all the holograms, if you played it. I don't want to give away anything. All right? Yeah. All right, so BioWare. Over the years, we've been focused on bringing more narrative to games to raise up emotional engagement, as Ray Mazuka, one of our founders, calls it. In Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, we had high-quality writing between you and your henchmen and between your henchmen. In Knights of the Old Republic and Jade Empire, we introduced interactive cutscenes where, within the confines of the technology, we could show the emotions the characters were going through. And in Dragon Age, we showed how encompassing your actions could be across an entire world. And in Mass Effect, we introduced a new way of telling narrative through more interactive cutscenes. So, a few definitions before we get into things. The levels we're talking about, when I refer to levels, I'm referring to linear missions or storylines that encompass a goal or a set of goals, like these games here. It's not a hub. It's not an open world, though I think there's takeaways from that, from this talk, that you might be able to apply to things like that. It's definitely not Angry Birds, and it's definitely not Peggle. And if you figure out how to bring in what I'm talking about to those games, please email me, because I'd be fascinated. So levels are the meat and potatoes of a linear structure game. It's where the main gameplay is. For many games, narrative is often bookends these levels through cinematics. So a level designer at BioWare, because it is a bit different than some other studios, but it's also the same as some studios, but just so we're clear, this is not us. And I'm kind of sad because I've actually seen this 3 times this week, so it's not as funny as it was last week. What we do is we create the blueprints of the level. We plan out the player experience. We script the technical aspects of the level. We bring in all departments' work. We insert combat and work on cover layout. And we get everything working within memory. But at the root of what we do is we're the co-directors of the level's player experience. We work with the writers, and we work with the artist, and we work with everyone to come up with what the player experience is going to be on that specific level. And I'll get into that. Now, before I get into the details of how we do things and how we did it specifically on Cure the Genophage, let me make a disclaimer. We didn't sit in a room and talk about how we were going to do levels and then laugh at our own ingenuity. That did not happen. What we did is we had a firm idea on what would make a great story. We had a fair idea with the experience of the team. And we would make a plan, and then we would utterly fail at it, and then go through this iterative process and actually have a plan of action for each level in general. So, what we're going to be looking at today, telling story through the level. And I'm going to take you through how we plan, how to integrate, and how to measure. Now, 2 of these are kind of Captain Obvious. It is what we do as level designs. We plan and integrate. Great, Dave. Thanks for letting me come out and listen to you talk about what we already know. And the main example we'll be looking at is Cure the Genophage, otherwise known as Priority Tachanka, otherwise known internally as Geno 2, and I'll be using these terms interchangeably. Now, that level, if you don't know the level at all, is a level where we actually have a cure for the genophage being I'm not even going to try and say that, a really bad disease that stops the Krogans from reproducing. And we have a plan to actually disperse it on Tachanka with Morden's help, or Paddock if you don't have Morden. And in the end, it's the one where the Thresher mod takes out the Reaper, which is how everyone knows the level. So this is the Genophage team. We have John Dombrow, the senior writer. We have Boyd McKenzie, he was a senior artist. John Ebinger was a cine designer. A cine designer at BioWare is a conversation animator who takes what the writers do, write up, and stage those interactive cutscenes that you've played. He was the initial cine designer on it, and about 2/3 of the way through production, we brought on Richard Boyer as well. And I was the senior designer, the level designer on it. So some other level examples we'll be looking at. We'll look at the bomb, otherwise known as the city ruins, otherwise known as Geno N7B internally. We'll also look at Grunt, otherwise known as Krogru internally. Actually, I don't think we ever called it Krogru. That was the actual physical level name. The Elusive Man's Base, otherwise known as Cat 4. Right. So, what should we do first? Bringing narrative into the levels. Plan. So, we involve story from the very beginning. And it's been an iterative process over time, over the games we've made. And it's evolved. But what we do now, and what we've done for Mass Effect 2 and 3, is we start with the writer coming up with a narrative razor. And really what this is just a brief outline as to the story they want to tell. It's really just a paper napkin idea. This gets sent to the core leads, which would be Casey, Preston, Derek, and Mac, and they take a look at it and approve it. And once it's been approved, then that writer goes to the assigned level designer. And they talk about the player experience. What is the player going to do? The level flow, the gameplay, the story. And then once we've got an idea of what we're going to do there, we write it up, and we submit that paper document for approval, which is really not unlike doing a pitch that you might see in Mad Men. This is an actual part of the pitch that we did for Geno 2. And it is not really the same as what we ended up doing. You can see there was a train in there, which Derek hated. And but what it did was it allowed us to express what was in our heads as to what we wanted to do for this level. So the next stage is we start getting everyone on board. We bring in art direction. The assigned artist for us was Boyd McKenzie. That is not Boyd McKenzie, in case you don't know who that is. And we talk about what the planned art direction is and how that's going to work with the story. Does it support the story? Does the story support the art direction? And does it all work for a player experience? We start bringing in the gameplay team and discuss some of the ideas that they want to do. And we start bringing in the departments, cine design and cine animation, bit by bit by bit, and get everyone on board as to here's what we're going to do. Oh, and we're going to lose the screen. Until everybody agrees. And once everybody agrees, that's from Kids in the Hall, by the way, in case you don't know what that is. Once everyone agrees, then we submit an execution document to say, here's exactly what we're going to do for this level. And then from there, we go to a playable pitch called the narrative playable. This is a portion of the playable, narrative playable for Geno 2. It is done as quickly as possible. In Unreal, we use BSP. And it has to reflect the beats of the level, the really brief conversations, usually just a temp line, text to represent what the cine-anim is going to be, and level events in the area. And if it's done right, it can actually be very similar to what the end result is. This is Boyd's work on the end, and it's really not that different. So then we have various other gating mechanics. And in these gating mechanics, we have technical requirements. We also have narrative requirements in each one, and we get more conversations, more banter, more things expressing what the story is that we're trying to tell. And when it gets to the hardened stage, it's essentially shippable, but we don't. We spend, schedule permitting, of course, some time working out the bugs and also polishing it. Now, this worked well for Mass Effect 2. But we found, especially for Mass Effect 2, that it actually meant that the story was only progressing in the cinematics and would essentially be bookended by conversations. This is actually from Morden's Loyalty that I did in Mass Effect 2. And that's really how it worked. It was conversation, gameplay, story progression, gameplay, story progression. And we knew that for Mass Effect 3, this wasn't going to work. The direction we had from the core leads was this had to be a theater of war. The whole galaxy was at war. And we had to bring these things into the level so that even if you're going to do something that didn't necessarily relate to the war specifically in the main critical path, it had to bring in this feeling of World War II around everything. So we really didn't want to go rescue a cat, because that really didn't have much to do with World War II, or the whole galaxy at war. And we realized that we needed to bring some of the story, some of this, through the level, not just in the cutscenes. And we've seen this before in System Shock, BioShock, Half-Life 1. And it's worked quite well. But we didn't think that just having ambient stuff happening around was going to actually convey the emotions that we needed to do in these levels. So we started looking at what was coming out, right? now at that time, over the course of time, Uncharted 2. Red Dead Redemption, I mean, that really brought a lot of the themes in the environment to the story, from the story. And we've seen a lot of games recently that have actually started bringing in story into the environment itself as opposed to just in the cutscenes. Yeah, just loading up. So for Geno 2, we had to sow the seeds of losing Morden, or losing Paddock if you don't have Morden, a new character that we hadn't actually spent much time with. We had to establish a relationship with Eve, set her up as the catalyst for the cure. We had to really hate Reeve, which is actually kind of easy to do, but we had to set that into the level as well. We had to show that the Krogans were worth saving, and we had to sow the seeds of how horrible it would be to betray them. So after some discussion, we realized that there was really three important elements of narrative that we had to bring to the level. The plot, of course, but also the theme, the message that the writer was trying to convey at the time. And also the pacing, how intense is the level as you play through it. Now, this was simple for levels, straightforward levels like Geno N7B, the bomb. The plot? Well, it was help a Churian squad stop Cerberus from detonating a bomb and wiping out half of Tachanka. The theme? Well, it was desperation. Lieutenant Victus is desperate to redeem himself. Cerberus is desperate to stop you from stopping them, and you're desperate to stop them from detonating the bomb. And at one point in the level, Cerberus is desperate to get the fuck out of there because the bomb's about to go off. And the pacing was urgent. We took the storming of Normandy Beach as a cue for the beginning of this level. And we had the opening of the level be oppressive. I had to feel like Cerberus was desperately trying to stop you from getting in. And as I said, halfway through the mission, we turned it around and had Cerberus running away. But Geno 2 had a lot of plot things we needed to bring. It was about curing the Genophage. It was about betraying or aligning with the Krogan. It was about taking down a Reaper for the first time. It was about finding out about the worth of the Krogans. It was about losing Morden. And it was about possibly losing Eve and keeping her safe. It was an impossibly long list of items. And we knew the story had to be told. So John and I sat down and said, okay, well, we got to do that. Let's work on a structure. Now, if you've been to a lot of the narrative talks this week, this has been brought up a lot. So I'm not going to get into the history or what it is. And in fact, what I'm showing here is actually kind of a simplified version of, say, what he was talking about at the Pixar talk yesterday. So, brief overview, 3-act structure, has a beginning, middle, and an end. In the beginning, in the Act 1, we have the inciting incident, the thing that starts the entire story in motion. We have the first reversal. This is the moment when the character actually becomes involved in the story. They commit. We have the low or the midpoint. This is just after when the main character wants to be, thinks they're going to be successful, and then they're not. And the second reversal, this is when a new plan comes up and is introduced to actually solve the original goal. And then we have the climax, which is the culmination of everything, the conclusion, completing the original goal. And the epilogue is really just looking back at everything else that's happened before, the reflection of the events. There's more info here. I'll have this link up at the end if you're interested. So, let's look at the 3-act. Oh, sorry. Yes, so we've seen the 3-act structure in movies like Die Hard, Matrix, Star Wars. It's worked really well in movies. We've even seen it work really well in games as a whole. And what we found is it actually worked really well at the level. So actually that small. So let's look at Genophage and how that worked, the beats of that level and how that fit in with the 3-act structure. So the inciting incident of Genophage is the Reaper at the Shroud. This is the moment when Joker says, well, we can't just go walk into the Shroud. You cannot simply walk to the Shroud. There's a Reaper in the way, and we have to deal with that Reaper. That sets everything into motion. We must get rid of that Reaper. And then at that point, the plan is surmised that they will unify the Krogan clans and use that as a flanking method while the Turians airstrike the Reaper. The first reversal, well, that's the highway crash. This is the moment where you've done the beginning in the hollows, and you get to the highway, and the Turians have gone ahead. You've stopped, and the Turians have gone ahead to attack the Reaper even though you've stopped, and one of them gets shot and crashes into your Krogan armada and wipes out everything except for two trucks. So it's that point that Shepard realizes, well, if I actually don't do anything now, if I don't actually commit, then this will not happen. We will not cure the Genophage. So, the low point, this is the moment when, sorry, there's going to be lots of spoilers. Reeve dies. So, this is the moment where you meet up with Rex and Reeve in the trucks. You think, all right, everything's hunky-dory, and then the Thresher Maw, the giant mother of all Thresher Maws, comes out and actually takes down Reeve, who's your second. This is if Rex is alive, I'm assuming that. And Rex and you and Morden and your party and Eve, that's all that's left. And it's like, well, how the hell are we going to do this now? It's only one of us. And then the second reversal, well, this happens actually quite soon after this. And that's when we decide to use Kairos, which is the name of the mother of all Thresher Maws. And Eve suggests, well, you know, what we could do is we could distract the Reaper with the Thresher Maw, utilizing the ancient hammers that, which are essentially thumpers, that'll attract the Thresher Maw, and maybe that'll distract the Reaper, and then we can actually get Morden into the crowd to disperse the cure. So a new plan is formulated. And the climax, well, that's when we cure the Genophage. But really, it's when the Thresher Maw takes out a Reaper. But it's also when Morden cures the Genophage. Or, depending on how you've played in our games, it could be also when you decide to kill Morden. Or maybe because you don't have Morden in Mass Effect 3, it's Paddock. Paddock cures the Genophage. Or maybe it's when you kill Paddock. Or maybe you convince Paddock to leave. Or maybe you convince Morden to leave. There's a lot of things that can happen in the climax, depending on how you've played. And then the epilogue, well, that's the funeral. We've dispersed the cure, or not, depending on if you killed Morden. It's the same scene, but the tone is very different. And then depending if you've done Morden Loyalty in Mass Effect 2 and saved Malin's data, if you haven't done that, played the mission or saved Malin's data, then Eve dies. There's not enough information. If you have done those, then she survives. But that's all part of the epilogue. We all talk about, all the characters talk about what's just happened and how we're going to move forward. So, we have our structure. We know where things are going to go and what's going to happen in our level. So what do we do now to bring in some of that narrative? Well, you can do something called an emotion and theme chart. It's quite simple, actually, and though we didn't actually do the physical chart, we actually just were very aware. We will be moving forward doing an actual chart. But what it is you take each level area, and we find out what the theme is for each area. And then we discuss what emotions can actually support those themes. And then we fill it out like a spreadsheet. And then, but for Geno 2, there was a lot of themes and emotions we had to convey over this entire level. Lots, and lots, and lots. And so this actually helped us figure out which sections, which themes we were trying to present, and which emotions were actually going to support those. So, for example, here's what Geno 2's emotion and theme chart looked like. In the Hollows, the very opening of the area, it was about two tribes working together, and the emotions that helped support this was surprise, tension, hope, alliance. in the pre-crash highway, it was the calm before the storm, before the crash happens. And it was very important that it be very calm there to help intensify the post-crash, which was about survival and chaos. So we've planned out, we know which each section of our story and what emotions and themes have to be done in those sections, but now we gotta integrate it. And so that we utilized some things that were part of Mass Effect and Mass Effect levels and actually brought those in to help support the narrative. The first one being combat. Captain Obvious. Yes, of course, combat. It's Mass Effect 3. We shoot things in the face. So, but what we found is that we can actually use the combats to actually express some of the themes in the area. If you have a really easy fight, then the player feels confident. If you have a really hard fight and oppressive, like at the beginning of Gen 7B, then the player feels forced back. A good example of this is actually Cat 4, the Elusive Man's Base. And the level designer on this, Chris Schonenberg, she utilized certain types of combats and enemy types to actually express the feeling of infiltrating the Elusive Man's base. I mean, first of all, there was 2 heavy mechs at the very door. I mean, that's pretty hard. That makes you feel like they're trying to keep you out. Later on, she has placed turrets and shielded enemies. And what this does is it actually helps convey the idea that this is a placed force working against you to try and oppress you out. And we did this on Gen 2 as well. We used the husks at the beginning in the hollows. It's a very easy enemy. And what we needed to convey in the hollows was confidence. And by having a very easy fight in the beginning, it actually allowed the player to feel that confidence. I just took out a bunch of husks. This was good, and make them feel good about themselves. And then we use cannibals. Then we use cannibals for the beginning of the end of the level, which we call the Road to Destruction. I'll be talking about that area in a minute. And we use cannibals there, not because they were necessarily easy, but because they were a good balance of making the player feel confident, but also keeping them back. They're like the next stage of hardness, and it made the player feel like, okay, I'm being pushed back, but I'm not going to be here forever, and it kept the string of themes and emotions that we needed to have at that time. At the very end, we have what seems like an endless stream of brutes working against you. Visually, the brutes are brutal. They are incredibly scary. And that, combined with everything else that was happening on top, helped fit in with the idea that this is chaotic and, it's the climax of the entire level. Now, originally, we actually had a Banshee. This is the Banshee. We had that planned in our mission, but we realized that that was actually going to work against the themes and the motions that we needed to have in the city, which is where it was planned. Because a Banshee is incredibly hard to fight. It takes a long time to fight her. And one of the themes that we had in the city itself was urgency. We had to get to Rex. We had to get there. And the Banshee was going to make us stay in one area for a longer time. And so we ended up cutting her because it didn't support that. We also had no combat in the Catacombs, and I'll talk about that later. In Gen 7B, we actually have those enemies curtail it and run. They're still fighting you, but they're actually running away from you because that's what's being told in the story. It wouldn't make sense that the bomb's about to go off and they're turned around and they're fighting you. So we actually have them run away and then fight you. Or at one point, in this point here in the mission, a guy comes out, an engineer comes out and actually places down a turret. It's like, well, screw this, I'm out of here, but this guy's going to take care of you for now. So another thing that we can use, level events. This is beyond just making something look cool, a big wow event. Let's have a big explosion over here. You can actually utilize the level events to actually express some of these themes and emotions. So, for example, Gen 7B, as I've mentioned before, we used the mortar fire. It wasn't just the enemies that were trying to establish this feeling of being on Normandy Beach. It was actually utilizing the mortar fire as well to make it feel like they were keeping you out. And the Road to Destruction at the end of Gen 2, everything's blowing up around you. It's kind of mimicking the whole idea that the world is collapsing around you. And what we did here is the Reaper's laser actually tracks where you are and changes, but we also had some pillars go off no matter what, because if there's any lulls in that chaos, it would have fought against what we were trying to do there. This is actually my favorite example. This is in Grunt. At the beginning of Grunt, you meet up with some Krogan, and you go into a pod to make your way to the squad that's on the other side. And at the moment that you're supposed to feel the most safe, in a house, the whole thing collapses down into a pit. And it really sets the tone for the rest of the level, which is you got to keep on your toes because everything's going to change. And then we utilized, I say we, it was Jos Hendricks, the level designer, not me, used swarmers, climbing up the walls. Like, there's stuff going on that's not necessarily to do with the combat in front of you, but you got to keep on your toes. It's going to be crazy in here. And then in Hollows, we had one of the themes was Alliance. And we actually had Krogan fighting up in the upper sections, fighting alongside you. We had Husks climbing up the wall towards them. All part of making you feel like, well, it's not just me in the shit. Like, they're in the shit too. So I'm working with them. So another thing you can be doing is you can actually use psychology through narrative through. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I know anything about, I didn't study psychology. I had studied English literature. But really, this is about visual manipulation. Let me give you a film example before we move into actual examples in Mass Effect 3. So, everyone know this movie? Lawrence of Arabia. This is the moment where Omar Sharif makes his entrance. And David Lean wanted Omar Sharif to come out of the mirage at the back. But the cinematographer and the set designer were worried that the viewer won't know where to look. It's such a long camera hold, it's an incredibly long camera hold, that they wouldn't know what's going on because he is so far in the distance in the mirage. So what the set designer did was he actually painted a white line towards where Omar Sharif is. You can see it right there. Now, this is something that level artists have been doing a long time. Artists have been doing for a long time. But we found that not only in terms of making the art point to what we want you to look at or go to, we could actually help bring up the emotions that we want you to feel as well. So here's some examples. Geno 2, this is the moment after the crash. You're on the highway. Everything's gone to shit. Your Krogan Armada has gone ahead. You got to get back to them, but you can't because the highway is blocked and you don't have a truck. Now, originally, the idea was that Shepard would actually move down and discover a pathway that way. But that didn't really fit with the art direction of the level. So the compromise we came to was that it would be a jump. Now, I know this seems like a simple thing, but if it had been a simple path to a door, it wouldn't have felt like a discovered exit. It wouldn't have felt like you were surviving. It would have felt like the hand of God had come in and given you a way out. And so it was important that it felt improvised, even if it was something as simple as a jump. In the Catacombs, we did a lot of stuff here. We wanted you to feel unsure. We wanted you to feel over your head. We literally put it in the ground to make you feel over your head. We got rid of saves. You can't save here at all during the whole time. The objectives, as you can see here, they're not actually pointing to where you have to go. They're ambiguous. Get out. And you have to figure it out. We submersed it completely in the dark with only a flashlight so that you didn't know where you had to go. In the end, this is the road of destruction leading up to the Reaper. You arrive, you go through the cannibal fight, and you start below the Reaper. You're overwhelmed. There he is in the distance, clear as day. You're overwhelmed. My God, this thing is huge. But then we actually push you through the level and bring you up to the same height as him. Nope, you can do this. Make the player feel confident. We actually make the player want to jump over the gap jump there. And then that's the immediate time that we actually pull the rug from under you, literally, and you fall down, and then you're below, feeling overwhelmed by the presence of this Reaper that is way towering above you. Geno 7B, we actually went through a lot of iteration on the boss fight here. Originally, we had it in front of you, so you could see Lieutenant Victus do his work, and you could ping off enemies, but it wasn't really a good gameplay experience. So we had him alongside you, so you felt like you were fighting with him. But that wasn't really feeling like you were protecting him, which is what we needed to do there. So in the end, we actually put him behind you so that you were guarding him. And then so you knew when he was in danger, we put up a little health bar in the corner so that you could actually see it deplete. As we get up to the Reaper, we're told that we have to hit 2 hammers. And there's a specific reason why we did 2. There they are there. This is the cleanest image I could get because it's all chaos there. And we have 2 hammers there for a specific reason. Because if it had been 1, it would have been clear as day. It would have felt like a cakewalk. I have to go there and do it. But by having 2, that fraction of a second where you go, oh shit, do I go left? Do I go right? Adds to the chaos of everything else that's going on there. Where we have the Reaper above us. We have things towering down around us. We have things exploding. Then we suddenly have brutes coming at us. And then that little bit of, which way do I go? And knowing when you get to that second hammer, or the first hammer, that you have to go through all that shit again to the second one, you know, just adds to the chaos that we were trying to do there. You know, and you can even do it on the level layout. Geno 2 had to feel epic. It had to feel like Lawrence of Arabia. It had to feel like Lord of the Rings, going over long periods of time and over large amounts of space. Now, obviously, we don't want the player to be playing a 9-hour mission. So what we did, and this is an overhead view of the actual map with everything loaded at once, is we actually jump space and time in the same way that they do in movies and TV. So these red areas are the sections that you actually are in the mission. And if you look closely, you can actually see there's actually 3 shrouds there because we change direction as we go in to make it feel like you're, you know, traversing a lot of Tachanka. And the narrative at those sections where we jump space and time actually supported the idea that, yes, we just went over a long period of time. Here's a layout of what those areas are. So we start in the hollows. The city Catacombs highway, that's all in the same area. And then we lead up to the shroud at the top. When the final cutscene plays and we go to the funeral, we are actually going back to the hollows at the end. Incidentally, John Dombra, the writer, always wanted Morden to ascend to his death. He was adamant that this happened because he was sure, and he was absolutely right, that if he went the other way and went down to his death, it would have different connotations. And that is a true story. I'm not making that up. So, everything's in the right spots, so we think. Now we need to measure what's in there. Now we have to take what we've got done, and we have to actually measure against what the plan was. So we take our emotion and theme chart, and we check each section. Is it supporting these emotions? Is it supporting these themes? Then we can do something called an intensity graph. Now, this doesn't have to be a literal graph. We didn't use one. But what you can do is actually have the areas that planned out. You actually do it in the planning stage and actually have it so what the intensity needs to be. So here we have, area 1 and the intensity that we intended. But afterwards, it's about the logging the intensity that is there. And I'll show you how we actually did that. But going through and seeing, okay, we needed the intensity to be high here to support the story, but in actual fact it's low, it's really about measuring and iterating, using some of the tools and other tools to actually support it, using combat level events and psychology. So let's take a look at how we measured on Geno 2. So the hollows, this is the beginning of the level where you arrive and Husks have taken over and we need to protect Eve. Well, the themes and emotions we needed there were confidence and alliance and hope. Confidence, as I said, we utilized the Husks, so you felt confident. It was an easy fight. Alliance, well, we had the Krogan working with you. Hope, well, that was actually done mostly in the cutscene, the arrival of Eve. Now, originally, when we checked the intensity, we wanted it to be high, but we actually decided at the last minute not to put combat in there. And we found that actually fought against what we needed in that area. I mean, not only for expressing these emotions and themes, but also because we weren't going to fight for a long time. We needed to have a fight in there. And so we introduced the husks, and that actually helped with some of the themes and emotions that we were trying to portray. And we actually ended up with a higher intensity than we originally planned. Pre-crash highway, this is before the crash happens on the highway. Themes were anxiety, hope. Post-crash, the themes were chaos and survival. And we actually nailed this, I think, the very first time. We were pretty consistent. In fact, we were able to iterate pretty early on bringing those themes out. We had Krogans lazing about and to help with the idea that, oh, there's hope. These guys are confident. There's, where we got to go. We're going to take down that Reaper. That's not a problem. We got the Turians on our side. We actually even encroached in the trucks behind you as a wall of alliance behind you. So we actually hit the low intensity that we needed to there to heighten what was going to happen next, which had to be high chaos. And that was simple stuff that we know how to do, with, bringing in flames and explosions. Catacombs, as I mentioned before, the themes were curiosity, caution, mystery. We had little hints of what the Krogan could be. What were they? We had Eve's banter actually support this idea. Oh, this is, the Catacombs, and this is what the Krogan once were. Caution, we had level events in there of the Thresher Maw rumbling in the distance, and that was actually planting the seeds of maybe we could use that later on. So then the intensity had to be low. We had to be able to hear what Eve was saying. But there was a suggestion to bring in combat because it would be cool, because it was in flashlight. It was in complete darkness. But what we found was that was actually going to work against some of the things that we were trying to say there, some of the themes. And so we just put in a dead one, and that seemed to keep everybody happy. The city reveal is an important part of the story where we actually reveal, not only is it just statues and paintings on the wall, but the Krogan actually built an entire empire that is unlike what you had your preconceived ideas of what a Krogan was. And the themes and emotions were awe and hope. And if you were deciding to take the Dalatrus' deal and betray the Krogan, it was about moral dilemma and maybe even guilt. Now, the original plan was, well, we haven't had fighting in a while. My God, this is a game. We have to have fighting in there, right as soon as we come out. And so we had a very small section for that reveal, and then we get right into combat. But we actually found that was actually fighting against our themes of what we were trying to say, the awe, hope, and the moral dilemma or the guilt. And so what we did is we actually removed that portion of the combat, pushed it back further into the level. And this brought down the intensity, but what it did is it allowed Boyd, the artist, to actually go in and spend some more time on adding greenery and flowing water. It allowed John Dombrow to write banter to support that your henchmen actually making comments about this stuff. And Rob Blake, the sound engineer, he actually came in and had music specifically for this, and we put in a camera movement to show what the Krogan once were, and it actually helped, removing that combat actually helped the story we were trying to tell. Through the city, it's frantic, it's urgent, it's chaotic. You got to get to Rex, you got to get to the end, everything is stopping you from getting there. The intensity was high, we wanted it high, and it ended up being high. And we did this through the combat. We did this through level events. This is one of the early ones. And then, of course, at the moment that you think you're going to meet up with Rex and Eve Morden, we throw in a Thresher Maw. And the mother of all Thresher Maws comes in and takes it out, and you have even a little bit further to go. In the road of destruction, it was life, threatening danger. But it was also about accomplishment. And we needed this was the climax of the entire level. This had to be high intensity. And we did a lot of things to support that. everything that I've talked about before. You know, the fighting, the Reaper stomping you. But what we found is that it was too bleak. We actually had players testing our level, stopping right before the Reaper and saying, well, I don't want to go the fuck in there. Like, no way am I going to go underneath that thing. And so towards around the middle of development, we threw in a very simple cutscene of the remaining Turian ships coming and supporting you. And it helped you feel like, yes, I can do this. I can accomplish this task. So, I got nothing for that. So, the plan. The first thing you need to do is you need to plan. You need to bring narrative at the very beginning. Express your ideas early. Work with everybody on that level. Talk about the story and how you can actually accentuate the things that you need to express the story. Plan it out. We used a 3-act structure. Maybe there's other structures you guys can use. But we used a 3-act structure to actually point out where the important areas of the plot of this mission had to happen. And of course, we used the emotion and the theme chart. We integrated using tricks and tools like psychology through the level art and level layout, through combat, using the right enemies to express the ideas, and level events to express elements of the story. And then we measure and iterate what we have in there. We look at the intensity graph, and we look at how intense each section is. We look at what we planned for the emotion and theme and make sure that it follows those things. And then we looked at our 3-act plan for the story and make sure everything follows the story that we're trying to tell. We had a lot of things we had to do to tell the story of this mission. It was about having a relationship with Eve and realizing she's the catalyst. It was about losing one of your oldest friends, or maybe it's establishing a relationship with a new one. It was about seeing that the Krogan were a society that could be worth saving, but at what cost? It was about going up against a Reaper single-handedly without a huge amount of weapons. And there's a lot of things we wanted to do. And of course, it's about the threshold about taking out a Reaper. There's a lot of things that we wanted to do, but in the end, what we really wanted to do was we wanted to put the player through emotional turmoil. At the end, we wanted them to say, my God, what did I just go through? That was a gut punch. And even though they may have lost Morden, or maybe even Eve, they felt like they had accomplished something. And went through, emotional turmoil, but they really felt like they had gone through something. And I've talked to some of the fans, and I've gone to some websites, and I actually found this picture here. And I think that actually summarizes that perhaps we actually did our job and accomplished what we set out to succeed. And that is the end. So I think we have 10 minutes for questions. I will do my best to answer them. But there's a whole bunch of people that are smarter than me up in Edmonton, and if I can't answer them, then you can email me, and maybe I can get you an answer. Which I guess this side, because that side's empty.
Yeah.
Hello.
Go ahead. Hi. Thanks for a great presentation. In the section where you're talking about measuring the intensity of the parts of your level,
yep.
You had like a little graph with a numerical value on it, and I wondered whether that was just for illustrative purposes or whether you actually have certain metrics that you use to create numerical data for the intensity.
As I said, we didn't use a graph for it, but we will be probably using something like that moving ahead, working with QA. So the numerical value really was about no intensity 0 and high intensity 10. And we didn't really have any metrics. What we utilized our QA team, our embedded QA team, to go through and say, how intense does this feel? And it was really more about a gut reaction to what was there. Not very scientific, but I think moving ahead, we'll probably look at something maybe a little more scientific.
Okay, thanks very much. That's awesome.
All right.
I think it's really inspiring how you're using all these elements of gameplay to tell the story and the emotions that you want. I want to know how long BioWare has been using this technique in their games and whether we can see more of it in BioWare's future games.
This really came about during the course of working on Geno 2. And we applied it to some of the other levels towards the end of development. But this is really something, this aspect of it is something new. We've always brought in narrative in various ways. But this is the first time that we've actually done something like this.
Do you think you'll be doing more of it in the future then?
So I think we'll definitely be using it more in the future, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you mentioned combat through narrative, or basically the difficulty of certain enemies affecting the player's psychology. I was just wondering if that also goes for cover placement in terms of how many cover nodes there are in a specific area, how far apart they are, what they look like.
Absolutely, that can definitely help. I didn't go into that because it starts going into more and cover layout. And
sure.
I mean, you can have an entire talk, not done by me, but people better than me up in Edmonton talking about that. But yeah, definitely you can use cover layout and stuff like that for sure. I mean, like I said, you could have a high point and actually fighting down below to the enemies below, and that makes you feel a little more superior, and vice versa makes you feel. Not only does it make you feel inferior, but you actually are. You're in a hard place because they can actually shoot behind your cover, that kind of idea. So yeah, that definitely can be utilized as well. But not at the expense of good gameplay. We would never want that. It has to be a good fight. You never want the player to feel frustrated or killed from cover just because of some of the emotions and themes that you're trying to tell there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yep.
Hi.
Hi.
So how do you determine which story elements go in cinematics and which go in gameplay? And then are there certain ones that you would want to be in one, but they end up in the other? It's
really kind of a potpourri. It's really just looking at it. It's such a long process. It's not like the whole process of how we make a level or a game, is like in the space of a week. And it's not like where we start is where we finish. I mean, there's a lot of iteration that happens below. So some things we may say, okay, well, we want to go in and have this kind of experience there, and this conversation there, and this is the theme that we're going to have there. But it might be that that's not enough, that we have to bring it in the level. And it's kind of more of an iterative, organic process, I think.
So do you find that one is more appropriate for certain situations than the other?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's also the whole gameplay aspect, right? Like, we don't want to do something that's going to fight against the game we're playing or work against that. We also don't want to do anything that fights against the art direction of the level. Yes, we need a giant tower here. Well, there's no giant tower on Tachanka. That kind of idea, right?
Right.
So it's all about collaboration. It's a very organic process, which is not really a great answer for you to take home and say, yes, they do it organically, and I don't know what to do. But you can email me, and we can talk more about that if you want.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
So you mentioned that in the beginning you guys kind of have a rough plan that you all collaborate on, and it's really important to get everybody aware of what you have in mind very early.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned the size of your team. It's like 5 guys, and I know that it's hard to.
5 core guys.
Okay.
And then we have QA, and then we have sound, and then we have cinematics. We have a lot of people.
Yeah, but making the biggest, I guess, level design decisions in collaboration with a lot of other people.
Yeah.
What are some techniques that you use as a team to make sure that everybody stays on the same page throughout all the different iterations and the different decisions and the changes that are made, and that everybody's aware?
You're not going to like my answer. Communication, really. It boils down to that. It's having people in the same room. We found we had the level artists and the level designers in the same room, and we found that was instrumental in there being clear communication as to the direction we're going. Also, having key people applied to the mission and bringing them in early also helped get us to the end goal. We found that there was a lot of chaos with people coming in halfway through development of the level, specifically in level design that kind of fought against knowing what the vision was of the level. But in terms of having giant charts or big things on the screen or on a wall, we didn't really do that. It was all about constantly communicating, even if it meant a fight. It's not like I remember one time Boyd and I fought. And it was a pretty big fight about something, but it was fruitful. Like, we got somewhere that we both wanted to go at the end. So.
On that note, on the conflict, I guess, how would you guys go about resolving differences in like opinion, I guess?
It's all about collaboration and talking,
Okay.
right? Like it's not like Boyd and I are very good friends, and we both want the best out of that level. And realizing that no one is out to sabotage your level, that you're all trying to get to the same goal, which is to have, you know, a high-rated, loved experience in the game. And when you realize that, then you can work with all the other departments. It's understanding them. I'm in a unique position because I've done almost every position in the games industry except for sound and coding. So I can relate to people a little more, but I think that's an easy thing to learn. You just need to understand how, you know, what would be important for art in this scene. And I know what I want, but you tell me why that's not going to work with what you want. And I mean, we're all human beings, right? So,
Thank you.
Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, great. 5 minutes? Okay.
Hello. So a question, 3-act structure
Yeah.
depends on the length of the acts, at least in movies. Like midpoint, by definition, should happen somewhere in the middle.
Right.
Obviously, making games is highly iterative, and making combat more challenging tends to lengthen it, right, and things like that. So did you run into many issues like, oh yeah, we changed the combat to fit the mood and this and that, and this spoiled the structure?
It's not about time, right? Yes, the beginning, end, and middle, you know, are different proportions to one another, but it's not about how much time you spend in there. It's about the beats of it, because
Right.
you know, an inexperienced player is going to be going through the combats a lot slower. But as long as they get to that point, for a linear game, for a Mass Effect game, they'll get to that point and understand, you know, what's happening in the story. I mean, that's what's key. We knew that we had to get to that plot point at that specific time. We knew that we needed these themes and emotions to build up to that certain time.
Okay, and technical question, measured intensity.
Yeah.
How did you do this? As in, tissue testers, people that never played it, one person, few people?
Yes.
Yes.
It's
what?
not. Yes, all of those. We had QA. We had each other. I mean, the level designers go through a peer review. The writers go through a peer review where everyone in those departments actually goes through and plays the level, and we sit down and we discuss what works for the level and what doesn't work for the level. We have QA, our embedded QA. They actually sit down and we get them to play through and say, okay, here's the things that we want to express in these areas. Is that coming across? Is this area feeling not intense enough, or is it too intense? And then, you know, all the classes and difficulties feed into that as well. Though we pretty much stuck with normal to higher. Anything below, I mean, people are going to go through stuff faster because of the nature of the difficulty.
Thanks so much.
All right, you're welcome. We have time for, I think, these two, and that's it.
My question regards how long do you think is like an ideal length for a level regarding actual playtime? Like, are you concerned about if the level's too long, player will maybe play it in 2 sessions and maybe lose some of the emotional threads that go through the level if they take a break for a while? Or are you concerned about, you know, is something too short, and are you losing some of the intensity or the scale of the experience?
That's a great question, actually. So each level is actually, it's its own contained story that fits within the larger story. So we want to make sure that those sections, those levels, tell a specific story and express the things we need to. We had a rough idea, we had a rough plan based on what we did in Mass Effect 2 on how long certain types of missions should be, you know, like a gold mission like this, a critical path mission, you know, maybe it sits around the 45-minute mark, and a smaller mission like Genoa N7B, maybe it sits around the 20-minute mark. It's not, you know, constrained to that, but it's like, it's a goal marker. And with regards to, you can't really stop someone from, you know, going to deal with their, you know, crying baby, or, you know, having to stop for the evening because it's 3 in the morning. You can't really account for that, but what we can do is, you know, just make sure that each section that they go through, and, you know, where we have autosaves in the level are at the key moments that if they pick it up at that moment, then you know, they're on the roller coaster, you know, down the hill or whatever. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, good.
Okay, great.
My question is just how much back and forth did you have with engineers, or did you feel like you had all the tools you needed to tell the story that you wanted to tell?
It's kind of a difficult answer that probably should go more into an email, and I think I've got like 30 seconds. roughly, we have the engineering team. We also have embedded engineers that work with gameplay, and then we would work with them if there's anything specific we needed for the level. But we also have technical designers that are actually quite brilliant at doing some aspects of the coding or scripting that we would utilize for that as well. That's the short answer. Email me if that doesn't answer your question fully, because I think we're out of time.
Okay,
so.
thank you.
All right, you're welcome. That's it. Thanks.